Welcome back. In this presentation, we are going to discuss the characteristics of and strategies for effective comprehensible input. First, let's begin with a review of the effective instructional sequence, or EIS. The sequence is the functional objective, where you begin with the end in mind, then setting the stage, which you studied earlier in this module, comprehensible input, guided practice, independent practice, and application, extension, and assessment. In this presentation, we will focus on comprehensible input. The definition of comprehensible input is the aspect of instruction in which the teacher presents in a realistic context the tools, such as vocabulary, structures, cultural information, students need to learn in order to achieve the functional objective. Key elements to remember that the comprehensible input should be 100% in the target language, should use frequent periodic comprehension checks, and the student production is limited. This step can be likened to filling the bucket. In other words, the teacher fills the students' minds with new learning. There are various characteristics of the comprehensible input, as noted on this slide. Let's begin with the first characteristic. Comprehensible input must be 100% in the target language. What, you may say? Or perhaps you're thinking, well, actually, I already knew that. Think back to your own days as a language learner, unless that was when the emphasis was audiolingual, repeat, 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 with no understanding of how to use it, or further back when the methodology was grammar translation. Yikes! But in recent years, linguists have studied and improved upon techniques for teaching language so that the learner can actually use the language in real-world situations. This is generally called communication-based instruction. To achieve this, it's essential that the instructor immerse the students in the target language so that they will be able to first imitate and eventually create communication. Having the teacher use the target language to immerse students in the language and teach content in the language is not just a trend or a fad. It is linked to studies on language acquisition, and it is, truly, the best way and the most natural way to teach a world language. Now that you're over the initial shock of that first characteristic of comprehensible input, or perhaps you're relieved to finally hear that there's a group of world language teachers who support you in your endeavor to solely use the target language, here's the next key characteristic. The target language used by the teacher must be understandable. If you begin day one in your French 1 or Spanish 1 class going 100 miles per hour in the target language using idioms and words they've never heard, you will quickly lose your students' interest. So here are some tips on how to make yourself understandable. First, if it is possible, in your target language, use as many cognates as possible. For example, the word important in English is importante in Spanish. That is a cognate that, for students who have never heard it, they will understand it, assuming you have already lowered the affective filter, which is the mental block that can be caused by stress and makes it difficult for students to receive the new information. A second way to make your comprehensible input understandable is repetition, repetition, repetition. The more you repeat new grammar structures for the students or new vocabulary words, the better and longer they will retain the new material. Repeat each new vocabulary word at least 7 times before you expect your students to produce it. A third way to make your comprehensible input understandable is to use a lot of visuals. When students can connect a new vocabulary word to a picture, they will remember it quicker rather than having to connect the word in the target language to the word in their native language, and then finally to the image produced in their mind. With visuals, you eliminate the middle step of translation in the process from language to meaning. Finally, to make comprehensible input understandable to your students, you can use your own body language. Some of you may be laughing to yourselves, already thinking, isn't that what I do every day? World language teachers are actors and actresses who, by nature, tend to talk with their hands and bodily movements. That's great. Keep it up, because it helps your students to understand you better. One of the important parts to remember with using lots of visuals and body language is to train your students to always watch you. The third characteristic of comprehensible input is that it needs to be input plus 1. In other words, the new concept, whether it be a new structure, set of vocab words, or a cultural element, needs to be slightly beyond the student's current level. For example, let's say in a level 1 class, stage 1, students already have become familiar with the structure I like, I do not like, do you like? Now you want to input something new for them. These 3 vocabulary words, eat, run, dance, let's say that you want to introduce these new words. Now notice, when introducing new vocabulary, it is best not to go beyond 7 new words per day. Brain research shows that This is all students will remember in a day anyway, so why do more when you'll just have to reteach it again the next day? Now, the teacher can do his or her comprehensible input in a way like this. I like to eat pizza. I do not like to eat broccoli. Do you like to eat pizza? I would ask the class. Or, I like to run. I like to run on Saturday mornings. Do you like to run? I like to dance. I like to dance with my friends. Do you like to dance? One more thing to note is that you do not want to overload your students with structures and vocabulary all at once with new content if you can avoid it. Introduce a new structure one day, and then introduce new vocabulary another day, or vice versa. Just keep in mind the saturation point. Another characteristic of comprehensible input is that it needs to be relevant to the students. Betty Davis? Who's that? Hannah Montana? OMG, she's so cool! Try to stay current with the generation you are teaching. I like to have the students tell me who their favorite pop culture artists are, and then I learn from them what their interests are and what is relevant to them. Besides pop culture, think about what the students are interested in at their age. For example, in my Spanish 1 class, the majority of my students are not interested in politics or the news. However, in a level 3-4 class, my students are mostly juniors and seniors, and they love to discuss these topics, and so we do. In my Spanish 1 class, we talk about school and what is cool to wear to school or not wear, what types of things they like to do when hanging out with friends, and so on. Just remember to keep it relevant. Keeping comprehensible input relevant to students leads into the next characteristic, which is to provide students with information that they would be able to use in the real world. Here are some examples. How to give and receive directions in a city. How to order food in a restaurant. How to buy or sell items in a store. How to book a hotel reservation with the desired accommodations. How to make a phone call. Now, here are some non-examples. Recite the verb conjugations. List all of the direct and indirect object pronouns. Those are not real-world communicative activities. Another critical aspect of comprehensible input is that the teacher needs to make the content interesting. Needless to say, the students are most likely not interested in banking and finances. However, learning about the most popular media characters is right up their alley. Also, the way you present the material is crucial. Present the new material in interesting ways, through acting, melodrama, using puppets or stuffed animals, and the students will pay attention and remember what you are teaching them longer. Be energetic, enthusiastic, and have fun. Hopefully, your students won't drool on the desks out of boredom. The next characteristic of comprehensible input is that it should be personalized whenever possible. For example, let's say you are teaching your level 1 class the vocabulary for the different family members. If this is a Spanish 1 class, you could even present the material in a culturally authentic way by discussing the royal family of Spain. For this comprehensible input, the teacher might say something like, Prince Felipe has 2 sisters. His sisters are Elena and Cristina. He has 2 sisters. He does not have any brothers. Although this is the start to a great comprehensible input, with repetition, visuals, and culture embedded, it is not personalized. Instead, you might choose to say, Class, raise your hand, the same thing as above, and then, Class, raise your hand if you have a sister. Raise your hand if you have a brother. To an individual student, the teacher might ask, How many brothers and sisters do you have? What is your brother's name? Again, it may not always be possible to personalize the new content during the comprehensible input. That may come in a later stage of the EIS. However, at some point, if you can connect the material to the students so they can make connections to their own lives, they will remember it better and longer. Another characteristic of comprehensible input is that it needs to be coherent. In other words, what students study in one chapter should in some way connect to the next chapter. Here's a very bad example. Last week, we worked on how to talk about items in the classroom and what materials we need for school. This week, we'll learn how to talk about shopping for clothes. This choppy transition from one topic to another is like a chain with a broken link. Here's a better way to provide coherency among chapters. Last week, we worked on how to talk about items in the classroom and what materials we need for school. This week, we'll learn how to talk about clothes we wear to school. Uniforms, dress codes, compare and contrast them to the target culture, and how to shop for them. Now the links in the chain are hooked together. Synapses in the brain are forming for our students. And don't forget, one of the main charges in teaching is to activate students' prior learning, so if we have a sense of broken links, we will never do that. Sometimes we luck out, and our textbooks do this for us. However, if this doesn't happen, you're the one in charge, not the book, and you can and need to make sure that the links connect. Occasionally, that might mean taking topics out of order as they are in the textbook and putting them in an order that makes more sense to you and your students. A final characteristic of comprehensible input is that it needs to incorporate frequent checks for understanding. These checks for understanding help us to know that our students are 1. Paying attention and not drooling on their desks, and 2. They give us feedback as to whether or not they are understanding the new material and to what extent, or if they need more visuals, more repetition, more gestures, or cognates to help them understand. Checks for understanding in the comprehensible input stage of EIS do not require much production from the part of the student. Here are 3 basic checks, and they should be used in this order, from easiest for them to produce to the hardest for them to produce. First is the yes/no response from the students. For example, yes or no, class, is this a hat? Yes. Is this a scarf? No. Second is the either or. Class, the first item, is it a scarf or a hat? And hopefully the class would reply, hat. The second item, is it a scarf or a hat? And hopefully they would reply, scarf. The third way to check for understanding is by asking the class what it is. This is the most difficult for them to produce, so it is the third one. Class, as I point to the first item, what is that? And the class hopefully responds, a hat. And then I would point to the next item, what is that? And hopefully they would say, scarf, after a lot of repetition. You will watch examples of this done in the classroom in videos in just a bit. Again, remember that this is all being done in the target language. There are many strategies available for you to do comprehensible input in your classroom. Here are some examples. You can use visuals, pictures, art, photos, drawings, videos, transparencies. You can use props, realia, real people. Get your students up in front of the class. Bring in other teachers. Sometimes an administrator is fun too. TPR, or total physical response. When I do a unit on sports and I'm teaching the words baseball, soccer, football, I have my students act out the sports as I teach them the new vocabulary. Manipulatives. Give your students little pieces of paper or pipe cleaners to show you that they understand what you're saying. Storylines. Tell them a story using the new vocabulary. Have them draw pictures as you tell the story. Mini dramas using voice, puppets, dolls, great acting. Demonstrations. How to prepare an authentic dish. How to make an authentic craft using new vocabulary or structures. Music, songs can also be a way to do comprehensible input. And authentic reading, such as menus, travel brochures. Here are the next steps to complete this module. First, continue working on the module activities in order. The next iMeet will focus on comprehensible input. And in the meantime, please continue work on your final project. The final project template is located on Blackboard. Begin completing the section on comprehensible input for your lesson plan. Thank you, and I look forward to meeting you soon on the next iMeet.